wanted to get them from the big rectangle to the little rectangle using your words, you've had to type in a phone number or type in a website. And we have really unreliable ways of measuring the effectiveness of that. And that's what I think is so cool, is that it's so hard to go from big rectangle to little rectangle until now. And Megan, I think you've seen some of that success in your previous roles.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it's all about shortening the distance, right? And you know, I think the QR on TV conversation came up kind of out of necessity for that, like closing the loop, driving people from one ecosystem to the other and kind of measuring it. But what's really interesting is, and I think that this is where this is a super fun conversation and where I want to like talk about it, is like, people know how to use QR codes. We've seen that. And people respond to QR codes. We've seen that. One of the really big and interesting conversations that we have right now is around the idea of giving up creative real estate for QR codes. And I think the big pushbacks are A, that they're ugly, and B, like, will people even scan them? And obviously we know that people do, but like, I'm so curious about your thoughts on creative integration of QR, and like, from your standpoint as somebody who creates video creative that's designed to be viewed by people, what are your thoughts about, like, is that something that, like, in your head, is the utility of QR more valuable than the
aesthetics of a QR?
Yeah, like, what are your thoughts about that, and how important is it?
Well, and like, so I think, like, for me anyways, that at the end of the day, like, it's, you can have a pretty spot, but if it doesn't achieve what you want it to achieve, it wasn't successful, no matter how pretty and how much you like, that cool transition you put in. It's just, in some things, like if you're making a film or something, like, you're just kind of like, it has to be this way, I want it to be this pretty and everything, and that's fine, because at the end of the day, beauty is in the eye of the beholder for something like that. For something like what we're doing, it's definitely function over form sometimes, and I really think the end result is what matters. And I think there's ways to do it interestingly too. I mean, like, again, Super Bowl commercials, we all remember the QR bouncing around the screen, and like, there's a lot of issues with that spot, but I will say that's a spot that makes people take notice and say, hey, what is that? And you're at least like captivated for that. And again, like I said, there's a lot of issues with that, but I will say this, like, it was disruption in the perfect way, and might not have been the prettiest spot in the Super Bowl, but it was probably one of the most talked about spots.
I'd argue it was the best spot, but that's an argument.
Well, and I think that's a fair argument, because that spot achieved what it wanted to achieve. And I also think that, like, that element of disruption is big. So I think a QR, especially in like a news promo now, is a little bit of a visual disruption just to see it, because you're like, hey, what's that? But I do, to your point, I think the utility of it outweighs the aesthetics, because we're still trying to get results on what we're making. And, that's a way to get your result and measure it. And I think a QR needs to go in absolutely every promo we produce from now until the end of time? No, absolutely not. And I think there's definitely spots where it doesn't make sense, but there's definitely things where it absolutely makes sense, like the POBs, like I'm talking about, a weather app spot, where you're trying to get people to download and you want to drive them there. And also, like you said, remove steps and make it easy as possible. So like, we've removed walls now, where it's just, you don't have to remember a website. You don't have to go to the app store and type in CBS 58 or whatever. It all does it for you. And like, so I think also, like, just the aesthetic is like something that people will become more accustomed to. And, again, they'll get prettier as time goes on, but they will still, be kind of a dot matrix of, of a weird pattern. But the same way, like during the pandemic, like, in 2019, if you were pitching like a lead package at 10, and you said, well, all I have is like cell phone video of myself in my house and 2 Zoom interviews, like people would have been like, we can't put that on TV. That's not good enough. Like, that quality isn't good enough. But I mean, obviously that has completely changed now by 2022, in that's kind of an expectation almost for your viewer you're going to see some iPhone video, you're going to see some Zoom interviews. Whereas before, like, the last thing you would want to do ever is put like a Skype or a Zoom interview. You had to be in the room with that person, and that expectation changed. And I think it's the same thing with QRs. You're just going to start seeing QRs everywhere, and they're just going to become part of it, and like an expectation of, yeah, there's a QR there. So that's kind of how I see that too, of like, aesthetically, it'll just become part of the aesthetic at some point, and it'll just be something that it's just there, and people don't really, notice that as a huge hindrance, or geez, look at that big giant ugly thing.
So like Flowcode is solved for a lot of the aesthetic, but you still need real estate for this, the code, if it's going to go up. Like in another life, when I would go station to station talking about marketing and stuff, I would invoke Ogilvy. I'd say, David Ogilvy said, if we know by, if research says people can read black text on a white background better than any other thing, you can convince me an artistic reason to make it not the easiest thing for a viewer to read. But if your reason is just art and doesn't fix the problem that it's solving, like the most legible version of what you're trying to say is what you want to put in front of them. I see this as an extension, and that there are ways to make it pretty, but you want people to interact.